One word kept appearing in every headline after Apple's biggest event of the year. Not revolutionary, not groundbreaking, not even impressive. The word was adequate. That is what the entire tech industry said about Apple's WWDC 2026. And honestly, that one word tells a story that is far more interesting than any product announcement. In today's breakdown, we are going to look at what Apple actually revealed, why the most important decision they made happened months before the keynote, and why adequate might actually be the most strategic thing Apple could have delivered right now. We will also get into the question nobody can fully answer yet. Apple built the new Siri in collaboration with Google, its biggest rival, the company whose entire business model is the opposite of Apple's. So, what does that mean for your privacy? And what does it mean for Apple's future? Let's get into it. The broken promise. To understand what happened at WWDC 2026, you have to understand how far Apple had fallen. Siri launched in 2011 as magic. It was the future in your pocket. But while the world moved on, Siri barely did. By 2024, even basic requests regularly failed. You probably felt this yourself. You asked Siri something simple. It gave you a wrong answer or opened a search page, and you quietly switched to ChatGPT instead. You were not alone. Hundreds of millions of iPhone users did exactly the same thing, getting done on ChatGPT and Gemini what Siri could not even attempt. Apple saw this. They responded with Apple Intelligence at WWDC 2024, a vision of a new Siri, deeply capable, deeply personal, built around you. But the information later reported that the 2024 Siri demo was essentially a concept video, not a working product. The features were delayed, watered down, or never shipped at all. Apple even faced a false advertising lawsuit over it. Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, who has more Apple sources than almost anyone in journalism, set the bar before WWDC 2026 with brutal clarity. Apple, he wrote, needed to move Siri from completely subpar to adequate, not world-class. Adequate. That is what a 2-year promise had come to. The deal nobody expected. But here is the thing. Apple did not just quietly try harder. They made a decision that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. On January 12, 2026, Apple and Google announced a multi-year collaboration. Apple would co-develop the new foundation models powering Apple Intelligence together with Google, using Google's infrastructure and expertise. Bloomberg reported it costs Apple around $1 billion per year. Analyst Gene Munster estimated the full deal could reach $5 billion. Think about what this means. For a company like Apple, this is the company that switched away from Intel to build its own chips. That replaced Google Maps to control its own navigation. That has spent a decade telling you privacy is a human right. Apple does not outsource its core. It never has. Control is not just a strategy at Apple. It is an identity. This identity goes back to the very beginning. Steve Wozniak building hardware nobody else could match. Steve Jobs insisting the software had to be just as perfect. The magic was always in making the two inseparable. That is Apple's DNA. Hardware and software, under one roof, answering to no one. This is not the first time Apple has made a deal that felt like a betrayal. In 1997, Apple was weeks away from bankruptcy. Microsoft, its biggest rival at the time, invested $150 million to keep it alive. Apple fans booed Steve Jobs on stage when he announced it. The headlines called it a surrender. But Jobs saw it differently. Apple did not have to do everything alone to win. It just had to survive long enough to prove itself right. That investment bought Apple the time it needed to build the iMac, the iPod, and eventually the iPhone. The rest is history. Now, nearly 30 years later, Apple is making another uncomfortable deal with another rival. The difference is, this time, Apple is the one writing the check. And now, the brain of Siri was being built with its biggest rival. Rosenblatt's analyst Barton Crockett called it a defensive step, not an offensive one. Apple magazine described Apple's strategy as cautious. McRumor's forum users were even blunter. One wrote, "The only AI I will use on my phone will have to be on device." The knives were out. And the question hanging over WWDC 2026 was not just whether Apple could deliver, it was whether Apple had already given something up to get there. What actually happened at WWDC? But then the keynote happened, and the story got more complicated. Because what Apple showed was not simply Siri running on Google. That framing, which spread quickly after the announcement, is not accurate. And it matters. Apple's Craig Federighi was direct on stage. The amount of the Google Assistant they use is zero. Apple Insider reported that Apple's new foundation models contain, in their words, not a drop of Gemini. What actually happened is more nuanced. Apple and Google co-developed entirely new models together, built specifically for Apple Intelligence. They are Apple's models. They just did not build them alone. The result is a family of models Apple calls Apple Foundation models. Smaller ones run entirely on your device. The most powerful cloud version, AFM Cloud Pro, Apple says is comparable in quality to Google's best frontier models. And then they showed what this actually does. The new Siri can hold a full conversation. It remembers context across your entire session. It searches your photos, messages, and emails to surface what you need. It can draft an email, plan a menu, find a friend's address from a months-old message, all in a single flowing exchange. On Mac, it lives inside Spotlight. On iPhone, you pull it down from the dynamic island. Remember switching to ChatGPT because Siri kept letting you down? That is exactly the gap Apple is trying to close. Macworld, one of the longest-running Apple-focused publications, called it the first time in a long time that Siri actually feels useful. Tom's Guide, which does hands-on testing of consumer tech, was more measured, noting that complex tasks took a while and third-party app integration remained limited. But the critical point multiple reviewers agreed on: the demos were real, deliberately slow in places, but real. After the 2024 concept video disaster, Apple chose to show something that actually worked, rather than something that looked perfect. One of the most widely read technology analysts noticed something important about that slowness. The fact that Siri responses took a few seconds was not a flaw. It was proof the demo was actually running. That is not nothing. That is Apple rebuilding trust, one deliberate, unglamorous demo at a time. The question Apple cannot escape. But the question that does not go away is privacy. Apple's entire brand identity rests on a single promise. What happens on your iPhone stays on your iPhone. Federighi said it again on stage, almost word for word. So how does that square with cloud queries routing through Google's infrastructure? Apple's answer is private cloud compute. Your data is processed in a secure, isolated environment, never stored, never logged, never used by Google to train future models. I made a full video breaking down exactly how this architecture works. Check it out on the channel if you want to go deeper. Independent security researchers can verify Apple's claims. Apple has even posted a $1 million bounty for anyone who finds a critical vulnerability. So far, nobody has claimed it. That is genuinely impressive. For a company routing your queries through a rival's infrastructure, that level of verifiable commitment is not nothing. But here's where it gets complicated. The model at the other end of that secure tunnel was shaped by Google's data and Google's worldview. You are protecting the query. You are not protected from the nature of the model answering it. And Ming-Chi Kuo, one of the most respected Apple analysts in the industry, framed the deepest risk simply: if Apple cannot outperform Google using Google's own foundation, then Google sets a ceiling on how good Apple's AI can ever be. That is the open question. The one Apple cannot answer from a stage. Every other AI company is racing to build the smartest assistant. Apple is racing to build the one you actually trust. The smarter game. So Apple delivered something real. Siri finally works. The privacy architecture is sophisticated. The demos were honest. And then the stock dropped 3.5%. Think about that for a second. Apple cleared a 2-year bar, showed the world a working product, and Wall Street punished them anyway. That reaction tells you something important. Not about Apple, about the AI era itself. Delivering is no longer enough. The question is whether you are leading. Apple spent $1 billion a year to become adequate. The terrifying part is that might be exactly right. But here's where the story flips. Because there is a version of what Apple just did that looks less like a retreat and more like the smartest move in the room. Apple spent roughly $12.7 billion on AI infrastructure last year. Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta each spent over $100 billion. Apple was not losing the AI race because it lacked ambition. It was losing because it refused to spend its way to the frontier, the way its rivals did. But by collaborating with Google instead of trying to outspend them, Apple did something its competitors cannot easily copy. It made the best AI experience on its platform completely free. No subscription, no paywall. For a company with over 2 billion active devices, that is a specific and defensible position. Microsoft charges for Copilot. Google charges for Gemini Advanced. OpenAI charges for ChatGPT Plus. Apple is betting that privacy, deep hardware integration, and zero added cost together form a moat that raw model performance cannot easily beat. Dan Ives from Wedbush Securities, one of Wall Street's most closely watched Apple analysts, called WWDC a baton pass moment, and said the AI foundation Apple just laid could add $75 to $100 per share in value as it scales. Morgan Stanley raised their price target to $360, with a bull case of $440. The analysts who cover Apple most closely saw something Wall Street missed. A company that stopped pretending it could win alone and started playing a smarter game. The handoff. Tim Cook ended WWDC 2026 with something that felt like a goodbye. He said it had been the honor of a lifetime. He said he believed the best was still ahead. Then, he wiped a tear. It was his last keynote as CEO. The man who built Apple from $60 billion to over $3 trillion in market value handed off a company that just did the most un-Apple thing imaginable. It asked for help, and because it did, it finally has something real to show. That is the deeper story here. Not that Apple surrendered its identity, but that holding onto that identity too tightly was the thing that was breaking it. The company that always insisted on building everything itself had to learn that in the AI era, collaboration is not weakness. Sometimes it is the only way forward. Whether this bet pays off, we will not know until Siri AI ships in beta later this year, English only, and not in the EU or China at launch. Real performance in the real world will tell us far more than any keynote demo ever could. But for the first time in 2 years, the question has shifted. It is no longer, can Apple do this? It is this good enough? And that is a much more interesting place to be. Apple did not lose the AI race. It refused to run it the way everyone else did. If you found this breakdown useful, hit the like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel grow. And drop your answer in the comments. Do you think Apple made the right call, or did they give up too much to get here? That's the breakdown. See you in the next one.